B. Dobbs, I think with the Buffalo Bills offseason, what was a little confusing was obviously they traded Stephon Diggs. They had a lot of draft picks in a draft that is historically not that deep. It was really top heavy this year. But I think my issue with the Bills is I struggle with their direction, and it kind of feels like their wide receiver room is a little bit muddy in terms of like who the top dog is. Hopefully, that's Keon Coleman, but then when you have Chase Claypool, Matt Collins, Curtis Samuel, I mean, even Khalil Shakir, I don't know. I'm very interested to see how this offense works this year.
Yeah, so we're on the same page where, look, the reality situation is this. It's not like it was a bad offseason. It just can't be any higher than a B because in the AFC, you're going to get graded harder. It's the reality situation. Everybody knows the big dog the Chiefs are trying to bring down, especially when you're the Bills and that ghost is still looming over you. What happened in the playoffs a few years ago. We all remember. I don't want to remind Bills fans too much, but they're never going to forget. And that's the thing is when you're competing against essentially the Chiefs and the rest of the AFC, you got to be steadily improving every year. And if you're not, you're falling behind. Which now we're at the point where, yeah, realistically, the Bills feel like, and I'm sure Bills fans would agree, they're in that falling behind territory. For me, I think the biggest issue is, and I'm sure you're very on board with this, when we look at the receiver room, and again, you know how I stand on it. Look, it's not about the specific receivers at the end of the day when you have a very talented quarterback like Josh Allen. If you give him the skill sets he needs across the board, he'll make it work, right? As we saw Tom Brady do all those years, as we've seen Patrick Mahomes doing right now, it's more about the skill set of said receivers, not necessarily the receivers themselves. It's not like losing Stephon was the big issue. The big issue is that you didn't replace him with an alpha route runner who has the full route tree. So now we're with it's a group of guys that all are half route tree, minimal route tree kind of guys, and they all are very single skill set. Now, granted, what I'll say is this. Could Khalil Shakir make a huge jump, and could Keon Coleman become a player that, yeah, we didn't expect him to become and really start to develop that route tree and evolve? Yeah, it's possible. But do we lean towards with what we know about these players already? No, not necessarily. And Khalil would have to make a really big jump, and Keon Coleman would have to develop a whole route tree that he still is missing like half of in one season. Again, it's all possible, but realistically, these are a lot of guys that all have very similar skill sets. Granted that they're not the same size players, but it's very similar skill sets across the board. He doesn't have his alpha dog, who's the route runner anymore like Stephon, and they didn't replace him. And the reality of the situation is this offense, it just feels like it needed more juice even with Stephon. And then you lost Stephon, didn't replace him to the standard. You added Ray Davis, which is a nice compliment to James Cook. And it's not, but you'll agree too, it's not just about the offense. The defense
No.
substantially lost a lot of really important guys where you got to say to yourself, do you feel like the replacements are up to standard? And, in my opinion, no, it's like they didn't really replace them with guys that are above the standard. They might have replaced them with similar players, but not. They didn't make any upgrades that were quintessential, and they definitely made, a couple decisions where it led to guys that were big parts of these teams leaving over the next couple, and that's where we're kind of headed with the Bills, it looks like.
Well, the Bills' defense has been very good over the last couple of years, but the Bills always felt like an offensive team where I think that has to do with the fact that Josh Allen is just so good and so electric, and their offense has always been so good, where it's like, no matter how much you're down by, like Josh Allen can wheel you back in the game. So obviously the focus on offense is, probably a little bit overstated in terms of like, oh, did they get ahead with their team in the AFC? And, I think this may be more of a down year for the Bills. And I don't necessarily think that's the worst thing in the world for them. I think sometimes you have to take a step back in order to go forward. And obviously what they were trying to run with these last couple of years just wasn't working. And kind of one of the last things I want to say on the Bills, and I don't want to say it in the sense of like skill set or route tree, but their wide receiver room reminds me a lot of the Jaguars, where it's like you got a lot of like decent guys in there, but you don't have like that number one alpha guy. And like hopefully Brian Thomas Jr. can be that for the Jags, and we'll get to that then. But as hopefully Keon Coleman can be that for the Bills. But obviously, like there is like a talent difference in what Keon Coleman and Brian Thomas Jr. are. And the Bills, I just struggle to see Keon being forced into that wide receiver one role right away. And they said that he was going to play X receiver. And don't get me wrong, like I love Keon. Like I've really liked Keon ever since the the draft process, even before his last year at Florida State. But it's just gonna be a new look Bills this year, and something that I don't think a lot of people. I don't know. Like I don't think a lot of people can really put a pin in what exactly it's gonna look like.
Yeah, no, and also just and to finish off because you made a great point. I almost forgot. Like with Keon playing X this year, so we already have the prerequisite that Keon is going to be essentially facing off against most teams, keyword most, but most teams' best corner every single week. And on top of that, he was the one guy that we were saying, along with a few other guys, that he really struggled against getting separation last year. Like he's fantastic at the catch point. He has a lot of great tools, but as far as separating goes, he wasn't separating very well. And that's going to be something where that transition right away to having to go against the team's best corners, it would have been so much more convenient for him to grow in that slot role where you get to face off against a lot more slots and a lot more safeties, getting used to, getting acclimated. It's going to be definitely a very kind of tough adjustment, I would say, for him. However, if he makes that adjustment, well, then we can essentially put to bed all of my takes from the pre-draft process. We'll see. We'll see if Keon can, really prove a lot of people wrong. But it'll be interesting to pay attention to.
Now, I don't want to discount or Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid. Obviously, those guys are good, but at the end of the day, like Keon Coleman would have been a great complement to a Stephon Diggs and a Dalton Kincaid. Like that, I understand that probably the locker room stuff was getting out of hand with Stephon in terms of you just can't keep him around. He's probably causing internal problems. And we talked about it last year when there was that training camp issue. Like we're like, this is getting too much. And a lot of Bills fans were like, no, it's just Stephon. But it's like, we've heard about these things for the last 2 years. Like something is going to give. And especially with the way the Bills season ended last year, it's just like, there's no way he's not out of there. So
no, the writing was on the wall for, I would say, multiple seasons at this point.
So the Bills, we have them rounded out at a B. Miami Dolphins, we also have them at a B. Dobbs, how are you feeling about their offseason in total?
So I would say about the Dolphins, look, my thing was, I like a lot of the moves that they made. And I think it's kind of just also though similar as you could say to a lot of like a B is in the AFC is a good grade, right? Like it's to get an A or even a B plus in the AFC, you have to do a lot of things. Like, look, the reality of the situation is I might not be the biggest fan of a few contracts, which is probably why I would say more than anything that I maybe gave them a little bit less of a high grade. Where I'm not look, I'm surprised they let Van Ginkel go after how he was playing for them. I'm surprised that they spent money on OBJ, given that you just drafted Malik Washington, who I thought was going to fit that role perfectly that you're going to have OBJ playing now. I understand logic, though. Give Malik some time to get acclimated. Like, I'm not fully against it. It's just you gave Odell a good chunk of money, too. And, look, as far as the O-line goes, I'm fine with the replacements. But they might not end up being that same caliber that they had from before. And if they're not, we already saw how it is with Tua, where you got to have his guys around him. The O-line could potentially be definitely a lot more of an issue this year. What they did on defense, I'm going to say, I'm a fan of most things. Like I think adding Jordan Brooks to the defense was a huge W. Adding Kendall Fuller is going to be a huge W. Like there are definitely some things you look at across the board, and they made some good moves. It's just, we're also on the assumption that they're going to re-sign Tua sooner than later. But I'm going to say this, as I'm sure you are. I don't necessarily know how to feel about it. Like it's like, if you're the Dolphins, you're pretty much in a position where you kind of have to at this point. But then on the same side of the thing, but that's what makes it so tough about the modern NFL. And when there's a guy like a Tom Brady or a Patrick Mahomes in the landscape, is that it's like it makes it so much harder when you're not like the guy. Where it's like it's nothing against Tua. I just don't know what's going to go, but I feel like logically we're going to end up in a situation where they overpay him a lot, and then they're going to be fucked on cap. And we've seen the story go over 70 plus times. It's like, you know what I mean, bro?
Yeah, I mean, Dobbs, like that is kind of the overarching story of the Dolphins here is usually when a team has their guy, they extend them as early as they can. And I think this is an indictment on how they feel about Tua because if you look at it, they haven't extended him yet. And he has the weapons. Yes, he may not have the greatest O line in the world, but they went out and got him Teron Armstead, regardless if he is injured like some of the time. They re signed Austin Jackson. Obviously, they felt comfortable enough to give him a 3-year extension. They bring in Aaron Brewer, who is a decent center. I do think that they could have probably maybe went and got a Christian Haynes instead of taking a Patrick Paul. I think that interior should have been addressed a little bit more. They signed Robert Jones and Isaiah Wynn, but none of the Jack Driscoll, none of those guys are moving the needle for me. And we saw what McDaniel did last year. He completely tailored that offense to Tua's strengths. They eliminated the weaknesses of the O-line by getting the ball out so quick. But the issue is you have OBJ, you have Jalen Waddle, you have Tyreek Hill, and then you get stomped out in a playoff game. Like, my thing is, what do you do, right? Obviously, they moved on from Vic Fangio. He is now with the Eagles. But as a Dolphins fan, I don't know how you're optimistic going into the season because, to me, I know there was injuries last year, but you're essentially running the same shit back.
Well, and let's include this because this is something I don't know how I almost forgot to mention, but I'm glad you made me remember. This is the biggest thing for me too. I think the Dolphins fans have to consider when I always, because I think of things very schematically, very, a team wants to run things a certain way, right? When you're losing Christian Wilkins, who was one of the biggest parts of your defense, and then now you're essentially going to be replacing him with Neville Gallimore. Look, it's nothing against Neville Gallimore. It's just that's a big turnover at basically the guy who was eating up double and triple teams consistently. All of a sudden, is everybody on the outside going to be able to be as productive? Is Bradley Chubb going to be able to dominate at that same rate we saw him when he was healthy last year, right? Is Jalen Phillips going to be able to play at that same rate? Those are all questions that we're going to have to see answered now because Christian Wilkins, more than anything, we're going to really see if that Raiders contract is worth it or not. I guess is the best way I could put it for every side.
And while I guess I do like the Jalen Wright pick, it just feels like Devin Achane, Jalen Wright, Raheem Mostert, like they have guys there. But I don't know. This is another team to me where it just feels like, yes, they didn't necessarily have a bad offseason, but in an NFL landscape and the way it is, did you really take the swings that you needed to get ahead? But also, if you want to spin it like this before we move on to the Pats, maybe they don't think Tua is the guy and they're not trying to take their home run swings right now. Maybe they are looking at the future at quarterback and are saying, let's not screw ourselves with long-term bad contracts. Let's not try to, I don't know. I don't know.
It would make plenty of sense with the fact that, like, as we've said too, like they have so many guys they're going to have to re-sign soon that have been key parts of the team. We've been ahead of the game. I think history will look back on us as we were ahead of the game on this one. Dolphins fans, you guys don't if you don't end up getting something done with Tua, just don't be too surprised. But along with that, I just want to say don't be too upset because the reality situation is if you re-sign Tua, you're going to lose a lot of these guys that y'all have come to love too. It's kind of like pick one. Do you want the core of this Dolphins team or do you want Tua? That's a question I'm going to leave Dolphins fans on to think about.
Man, Michael Penix would have been so interesting in this offense. But at the same time, I mean, you're kind of getting, you have a stronger arm, but you're getting similar things that you already have with Tua. I don't know. I don't know what the Dolphins do at this point. Moving in to the New England Patriots, we have a B-. So I don't know. I think I honestly would have given them a lesser grade if for the fact that they didn't take Drake May. I think Drake May was QB2 for me in this class, and I don't necessarily love the situation that he's being put in. Now, I'm really hoping they sit him for a full year. I maybe play him week 15, 16, 17, after he's gotten a little bit adapted to the league. My fear is that Robert Kraft is going to want to win, and they're going to put him out there, and in reality, it's just going to screw him up. Because after watching what the Patriots, if you want to call it offense, was last year, it was putrid. Like, I didn't want to watch it. It was gross. I remember watching Mac Jones when he was in London, and it was just one of the most, like, I could not believe it I could not believe how bad it was. They take Jalen Polk pretty early. They get Javon Baker, who I really like, and I think, I am surprised they got him that late. And I really do like Jaheim Bell. I do think their reaches at O-line was, I don't know. The Patriots tend to always reach at O-line, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. I didn't love their offseason additions. I don't know. The Patriots are just, you re-signed Christian Barmore, good, but this is not an ideal situation for a quarterback, and maybe they're going to try to take a swing last year. I think that since the fact that they struck out on Calvin Ridley, they struck out on getting like a receiver high, and they struck out on getting a deal done with Debo or Ayuk, is kind of rough. And another thing that I want to put, and then I'll let you go, Dobbs. I don't know if you saw, but the Patriots are interviewing GMs for the position. Why the fuck would you let Elliott Wolf draft and then interview GMs? Why would you do that? Why would you interview a GM to an already drafted team? That just made no sense to me.
Yeah, no, it definitely doesn't make a lot of sense. And I'll say, okay, I'll give you, because you touched on a lot of things. I'll just touch on the few things that you did, because you nailed most of it. What I'm going to say is there was a few things too on top of the things you said that confused me a little bit. And here's the first one. Look, the year prior to this, right, Kyle Duggar had a really good season. However, this last year, especially on tape, Kyle Duggar, relatively shaky, right? Not the same player he was the year before. And then you went and gave him a really big sum of money on, I think it's like a 2 or 3 year deal. So, and then again, the way the Patriots have always operated, just confused on that, because that's going to take a very solid chunk out of your salary cap. Move that I liked, credit where it's due. I liked the Christian Barmore re-signing, pretty much the cog of this defense at this point. I like the fact that you got a deal done with Christian Barmore. But more than anything, how about this? The Caden Wallace, right, where they drafted Caden Wallace in the 3rd round. You're not, as far as right now as the depth chart goes, the official Patriots depth chart, he's not even playing left tackle, which is where you would have assumed they would need help, because you have Mike Onwenu as your starting right tackle who just got the fat extension. So essentially, as of right now, they drafted Caden Wallace to back up Mike Onwenu. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me in terms of how they spent that capital.
I think Mike, and I could be wrong, I think they are going to have him play guard.
See, I could get it too, but here's where it doesn't make any sense though then, is you'll agree with me on this, is look, Cole Strange was your first round pick a couple years ago, and you're not going to give up on Cole Strange yet. He's been playing solid enough. He's been playing solid enough. And then City what round did they draft City last year? Let me get a quick reminder for myself. 4th round pick last year. City finished 27th out of 79 guards in the league, which for your rookie year is definitely nothing shabby. So it's like, that's really the question that we're at now, is where is the capital for this O-line going, where you didn't overspend the capital, and how is it going to make sense? Right? You just signed Chukwuma. Like, I don't really understand, I guess, the allocation of the resources for the line. I get that you're looking out, I guess, maybe depth, like just having good depth across the board. I mean, yeah, the reality of the situation is, though, to keep it as short as possible from my end, because you covered on most things. Look, if they don't force Drake May into the fire, it was a relatively solid offseason. If they force Drake May into the fire, this offseason was just as bad as a lot of other ones recently, and it's probably not going to help the team out much at all, if any, long term.
Yeah, so don't quote me on the Mike Onwenu thing. I swear I saw that, and then maybe I'm thinking of the Jordan Morgan for the Packers. I think they're talking about playing him at guard. That's just what I've been hearing from fans, but I don't know. I know they moved him around.
Are never official until it's never official till camp actually happens, and then actually, you know what I mean? It's kind of just more than anything, just an initial assumption.
Yeah. So Dobbs, before we move over to the Jets and finish out the AFC East, what do you think about this? So I heard that Elliott Wolf, the de facto GM, I think that's the right word for it, wanted to trade the pick because the offers were substantial. And Kraft was the one that wanted to draft May. Would you have drafted May, or would you have traded the pick?
It's actually just hilarious. Like, I think we have seen over the course of history what happens. It's funny. It's just all the writing of how the Patriots' downfall has happened is so clearly on the wall for everybody that's been paying real
Yeah.
attention. Like,
You want to know who
if you're
hasn't
the
seen it?
just this is just
The
my
the Patriots fans, because they've been so jaded with quarterback play and winning over the last 20 years. They're like the only
no,
people that
it's
have
like
not seen this.
no, literally, and again, I think you would agree on this. Whenever ownership starts to not trust the people that they hired to make the decisions, everything goes to shit. Nobody trusts each other. Nobody respects each other. It becomes an internal war for power. When in reality, as we know, the owner, if you hire the right guys, that's when you take the step back and you say, you guys know the football. I cut the checks. But now that Kraft is, I don't know, stepping out of his role a little bit, you could say, I just don't see it boding well for the Patriots long term at all. And that's exactly what a lot of Patriots fans, I know Patriots fans are echoing the same sentiment as me. So it'll be very interesting to see how this goes. I wish y'all the best of luck, Patriots fans, because it's looking dire. Like it's looking like Drake May, like Hunter's saying, is going to get forced in there by week 4 this year. And it's just pray that doesn't happen.
Moving on to the New York Jets, we have an A minus. Dobbs, how are you feeling about their offseason?
I think we could agree, you know what, the Jets, as for as many wrongs as there were last year, they wrote a lot of them, they wrote a lot of them this upcoming season. For starters, I think I'll start with something minor, but something worth noting. You remember when they signed Chuck Clark last year and he tore his, I believe it was either the ACL or the meniscus in the OTAs. All right, you
I'm not
finally
laughing
get the
because of the
safety that you
injury. It's
signed.
just like, what the fuck? Like, it's just, of course it happened.
Yeah, so you're finally going to get to see Chuck Clark play in a Jets uniform, which should be nice. Okay. And then I think you could say you feel really good about the DB depth on this team, right? Like if we're at a point where we can say we're the most worried about Tony Adams, who again is coming off of a relatively solid season last year. He's the guy you're most concerned about per se, but he didn't play bad ball or anything for you last year, so it's not like anything to be too worried about. The linebacker core, rock solid, if not one of the best, if not the best linebacker core in the league, right? Like this defense is really gelling. You added Javon Kinlaw, who really might be able to make a big jump back with Robert Saleh. You never know, right? Like that's something also you have to monitor. So as far as the defense goes, we're right there. And then with the offensive line, still not the greatest in the world, but you added two guys that you can feel very confident in on the outside to keep Rodgers healthy, which was definitely the big Jets fans' number one wish list, I think, this year we could all agree on. When you added Morgan Moses, you added Tyron Smith, that's amazing. I think the things that I didn't like that kind of pushed them away from being in the A range for me personally was just me. Look, I'm not a big fan of the Mike Williams. I think for a team that already has been dealing with so many injury issues, Mike Williams to me is the kind of guy where you're lucky to get 10, 11 games out of him in a season. And I don't know if that's exactly the type of situation you want to be in, where essentially your only other guy who can get off the line on press and has a full route tree is Garrett Wilson, who is an amazing receiver, but still relatively young with not much rapport with Aaron Rodgers. It's just to me, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the way that they built the receiving core. Malachi Corley, I like him. I don't know if I like the situation he fell to as much. I really don't. I think I would have really liked to see him fall to a situation where more like the Niners or where he'd have a very designated slot role. So I don't know how I feel about him on the Jets. But again, he could prove me totally wrong and make it work totally fine. But other than that, right, they did a lot of things that they had to do. And all in all, I think we could say it was a very impressive offseason in terms of how much that they had to fix.
Kind of to echo just kind of what you said, the fact that they just rebuilt the line and added depth and then also looked towards the future in the draft while taking Olu and not going with a Brock Bowers, I think says a lot about, okay, after the way they've handled this draft, I don't believe that, barring a disastrous season, that Saleh or Douglas are even close to the hot seat. And obviously, an offseason move that I love was the Hassan Reddick trade, getting him for, what was it, a 2026 third? Like, that defensive line is already stacked, and you're just adding more and more. The Jets really do need to compete for an AFC championship this year, and if they don't, it's almost kind of like, kind of a failed project, because realistically, Rodgers says, what, this year, next year, maybe a year after that, and who knows if he's with the Jets after those 2 years. So overall, I did like. So I will play devil's advocate with you on the Mike Williams pick. I think in terms of the quality of receiver that they could have gotten in free agency, he was probably the highest that they were going to get at the position for what they could pay and what they offered. Obviously, he basically got the OBJ deal. And in terms of would you rather have OBJ on your team at this point or Mike Williams? I'm taking Mike Williams any day to pair with um, Garrett Wilson, and then you have Brees Hall, you have Malachi Corley, and then, I mean, what, Lazard is your three? I think that they did what they could in terms of offense this year. Would I have liked to see them go and get a higher guy? I mean, like, the rumor is that they were super in on Odunze if he was there at 10. So that is a reality that could have happened. But I will agree with you in the most part in saying that the Jets did have a very, very solid offseason, and in my opinion, the best out of the AFC East teams.
No, yeah, I think the bottom line is this, as it was last year, but as we saw, it very much hinges on the health of this whole line, especially and Aaron Rodgers, right? That's the thing. But if that core can stay healthy, this is a roster the Jets have built that can compete for a Super Bowl. That is objectively a fact at this point. Now, it's just a matter of them being able to stay healthy. That's where the questions come in, right? But if they can stay healthy, truly, you would find you would be hard pressed to build a really, a more stacked out roster with the salary cap. I mean, they really have really filled out really, really well. It's just about health now. It's about Aaron Rodgers, it's about him being able to stay healthy. That's
I
really the bottom line.
I do really like the Jordan Travis pick, actually. I think that was actually a really good pick for them.
No, that's well on top of it too. You got to think about the future a little bit. Even though again, I know what is Jordan Travis's ceiling, I don't know. But at least behind Aaron Rodgers, you're definitely getting to be able to probably maximize that ceiling.
100%.